Hello, hi, welcome back. I'm Jura Shahya, co-founder of OSPROV, your organization's handy software. We provide flexible process automation to automate your critical process easily. Welcome back to my stream. Okay, we're going to continue to talk about web programming. Yesterday, just to recap, we talked about web programming, the types of programming language that we have, and why we choose web programming. And now today, I'm going to delve on, zoom in to the programming language that we're going to use for our web, which is the PHP programming language, and also the framework that we use, which is Laravel, and why we choose a framework instead of just using coding from scratch. Okay, so let's talk about PHP Laravel Framework. Alright, so here's the website for our framework, laravel.com. So it says here, this is the PHP framework for web artisans. So it's a web application framework with expressive, elegant syntax. They've already have the foundation, freeing you to create without sweating the small things. Okay, so this is one of the framework that we have in PHP. So just let me show a bit on what do you mean by framework. Okay, let me just jot down something. Hi Hajira, thank you for liking the stream. Okay, here. Okay, imagine you're building a car. For example, you have a car. Okay, this is a car. Mind my drawing. I'm not an artist to draw. Okay, so this is a car. Okay, how do you build a car? Okay, you can start from scratch. Let's say you're going to get rubber and create the tires, and then you get the steel, and you make a steel, and you mold the body, and then maybe the glasses. So you get sand and you build the glasses, and then of course the electronic components so you build all the components So that is if you build from scratch. So imagine if you're trying to build a car from scratch. I assume this is going to take maybe more than a year, maybe 10 years just to create a car from scratch. Okay, so what's the difference if we are using a framework? Okay, if you are using a framework, so imagine you have a framework. Okay, you can think the framework is kind of like a factory. So for framework, okay, you already have the mold for the tires. You already have the specification to do the body, the chassis and all that. And then of course you have the spec you have all the ready-made glasses where you can just mix and match. You mix and match, and then you can also join the components together. So in a way, this is how it feels like if you have using from scratch. Okay, you can imagine you doing coding from scratch. Imagine this car is your PHP, your programming language for the web. Okay, imagine you code from scratch. You can have a coding PHP from scratch without any framework. Okay, so that's coding from scratch. So you imagine if you coding from scratch, it's going to take you a very long time to program it. But if you use a framework like Laravel, so you already have the mold, you have all the components inside here where you can just mix and match. So it will make your life much easier. You can even reduce the time taken to create a car. So maybe you only need 3 months to produce a car. So that's the difference of using a framework. Okay, so let's look back at our Laravel framework. Okay, what do we have here? So let's browse through. Okay, you can see that when you look into the Laravel documentation, you can see that okay, this is the architecture concept. So this one is quite complicated, so I'm not going to delve in this. You can see that okay, they have what concept they call routing, and then they have all these views, and then they have all the error handling, logging, session management, validation, and also you have the front end. You have the blade template. They can compile also your assets. Asset is like your images. And then if you have a CSS, so they can compile this all together. And also they have all the security, the authentication, authorization, email verification, encryption, and the rest. Okay, so imagine you have to build this one by one from scratch. So it's going to take a really long time. But now everything is here. The component is here. You can just use it. With just a few tweaking, you can have everything here. You can have email verification, you have encryption, and then of course you have if you go deeper, you can have all the file storage, you have the mail notifications, you have the events if you have events, broadcasting, you have tasks if you have, like for example, this task is going to take, this functionality is going to take a long time. For example, maybe you are generating a really big image. So you can use queues or task scheduling. You can schedule it at a later time to run. So imagine doing all this from scratch. Definitely it's going to take a long time, but most of it okay. There's one concept in programming, we call it dry, DRY. It means don't repeat yourself. So why do you have to reinvent the wheel? Why do you have to create everything from scratch when all these components have been tested? And the code is very clean, so it's been used by many people around the world. The contributors in Laravel, you can have tens of thousands of programmers contributing to this Laravel open source framework. So why do you want to do this all over again, and you alone going to do it? So it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because you are only one programmer. This one is being backed by a lot of programmers, and most of them are expert in the industry. So let's just use their brain instead of using your own brain. So that's the reasoning why we use framework. Okay, so you can see here inside here also, okay, they have what we call this database. Okay, when we talk about application, like I mentioned yesterday, we must have some sort of data where you put this inside. Hi Ashrul, thank you for liking the stream. Welcome to the stream for those still watching. Basically, I'm describing on the PHP Laravel Framework today. Alright. So before we can go delve into the programming and all that, let's look deep into why we have a framework and all that. Okay, you can see here. Okay, I mentioned yesterday, you have the database. When you do any sort of programming, you need to store the data. You need to have a data storage. So the way we do it in the programming world is to have a database. So database is just you can think of it as like the way you store data, but in a more structured way. So you have a database. Alright, so in here you can see that they have a few components like query builder. So when we talk about database, you have what we call the SQL syntax. So we can use a SQL. Later I'll show you a bit about SQL. Okay, and then you have, okay, in Laravel they have this concept called migration and also seeding. Later on I will explain what this is all about. We just want to see what the components that we have in Laravel. Okay, and then Laravel has this what we call eloquent ORM. Don't be intimidated by this fancy name, eloquent. It's just you can think of it as an object. This one they call it object relational model. You don't have to know about that. Okay, later I will explain a bit on what does it mean by ORM. So in ORM you have the relationship, you have the collection, mutator, everything lah. And then of course Laravel also comes with testing to ensure that your coding is high quality. You need to do tests. So how to do tests? So they provide everything here. You can have like HTTP tests, you have the browser test, you also have also the database test, and then also they have a concept called mocking. We can do have this later on after this. Okay, let's go back to this framework concept. So Laravel is based on what we call MVC, model, view, and controller concept. Let me explain a bit. Okay, let me remove this one. Okay, let me create new one. Okay, what is MVC? So it's based on this architecture or concept called MVC. Okay, this is the architecture. Architecture ni macam what we call building blocks lah. Maknanya if you have Lego, is how you design the thing lah before you even do it. Okay. Okay, why is this concept MVC relevant for web application? Why is this relevant? Okay, you have your web apps. Okay, last time when during the evolution of web programming, maybe in the 1990s, okay, you can have the typical last time when I was using this web programming, I use this software called Cold Fusion. This one is very long time ago. Cold Fusion. So what they have usually is, okay, let's say you have one file, this index CFM. Okay, everything will be inside here. You're going to have your HTML tag, and then you also have what you call Cold Fusion text inside here, CF text. Okay, and then you can do all your programming, and then you close it. So when you run the web which is using Cold Fusion, you will render the dynamic information here. Even calling from database will be in a single page. Hi Afirul, thank you for liking the stream. You only have a single page. So this is like building from scratch. If you are building from scratch, yes, it's like this. You're going to have one single page. You will put all the logics inside here, everything. Okay. As opposed to what we call when we use a framework that implements the MVC. Okay, M stands for, okay, we're going to have three components. We're going to have model. Okay, you're going to have this view. You're going to have this controller. Okay, what does it mean? What is model, what is view, what is controller? Okay, when we use MVC framework, we are trying to separate this coding into a tree structure. Why we do that is this one is more for maintainability, meaning that later on when your application grows really big, you need this. You need to separate this instead of having one single file. The reasoning is very simple. Right now you are only one programmer. What happens if you have many programmers and they all have a different skill set? One, for example, you have a designer, one which is expert in front end, JavaScript. And then you have one which is expert in data modeling, where they can design the fields, the attributes of the data, how the relationship between the data. Okay, and then you have another one which is specialized in back-end logic. So you have three different kind of person or different kind of role in your application, when you design an application. So you cannot have like this single file where everything is here. The database is calling from database is here, querying from a database is here, even the presentation is here. So how are you going to maintain this? This one is going to be really huge. So by having a MVC architecture or concept, so you will have three separate things. Okay, the first thing is model. Okay, you can imagine the model is like an object. Okay, for example, let's say I have a user object. So this is a user. Okay, when we talk about user, you will have, most likely the user will have an address. Okay, but then you can have multiple address. You can have office address. You can even have a work address. Okay, the user also might have a detail like his date of birth. Okay, you can see that. Okay, let's say you have this user object. Okay, we can imagine this like a real life object lah. You have a user. You also have this address object. So they have in the model, you have the relationship. You have, for example, this is in modeling terms, data modeling terms, we have what we call one-to-many relationship. It means that one user can have many address. You can have office address, you can have address. So they have a relationship inside here. So inside the model, you have a relationship. And then you have what we call attributes. So the user, you have the date of birth. Okay, this model try to represent a real life object. So meaning that when we talk about application architecture, we want to imagine a real life object. Okay, I take one example. For example, you are building, let's say, okay, just take one example of the MySejahtera app that we have currently. Okay, what do you have inside there? You have where you check in. So when we talk about checking in, so what kind of components that we're going to have? So let me just take one model for that one. Okay, let's take the MySejahtera app. Okay, we have this MySejahtera app. Okay, what kind of components that we're going to have? Hi Sufyan, thank you for liking the stream. Okay, imagine when you open the app, you have to register, right? So you are a user. Okay, when you register, what do you have to do? You can also have dependency inside there. Okay, what else do we have? You have user. Of course, you have your details. So you have your IC number, you have your date of birth, you have your gender. Okay, all these are what we call in the model world, we call these attributes. Attributes. Okay, this one is a relationship. You have a relationship. So meaning that you might have many dependency. So this is one-to-many relationship. You can have dependency. Of course, dependency also have their own attributes like their name, their IC, their date of birth, and the rest. Okay, what else do you have? Okay, you have a place where you check in. Okay, and then in this place, you might have like information like the state. Okay, what else you have? Let's say you have the daerah. Daerah is what? Daerah is district. Okay, you have the district. Okay, so what about the relationship between user and place? Okay, this relationship between this is what we call many to many. What it means is that you can have many users check in into multiple places. So that's the way that they architect it lah. So you can have many users and many places. So this is what the relationship between this is what we call the object relation. So you have the data the data object relations between each of these different kind of real life objects. So all this in Laravel or most of the MVC kind of architecture is what we call a model. Okay, all of this, if you want to translate it into technical, you can imagine that okay, you're going to have one user table. Okay, when you translate it into a database, you have user table, and then inside the user table you have the field. Okay, you have the field. You have the field like IC, the date of birth. Okay, and then you have the dependency table. Okay. And then you also have what we call the foreign key concept. So everything here, you can see that when you try to map this into a database, it's going to be complicated. You have the technical key, everything here lah. But okay, the beauty of using a framework, a Laravel, they hide this complexity. This complexity is hidden, meaning that you can work only on this model, on the object, without having to know about the database, what kind of field you have to do, what kind of SQL script you need to create. So everything here is encapsulated. Okay, what I mean here is, if you want to write this into a database, it's actually like this. Okay, let me just delete this again, because I only have maximum 5 in here, so I cannot create more. Okay, let's talk about this. Okay, the language when we do database is what we call SQL. So when you write a SQL, it's like something like this. Select, for example, I want the users. Okay, this one stars mean wildcard. Select from users. Okay, this is standard SQL. What it means is I will get all the information from the table users. So you can see that you need to know a certain kind of different language now, a SQL language, to get information from a database. Ya, yeah, betul Shu. Laravel Framework lebih kemas dan lebih tersusun. Yes, I agree with you. Okay, so you have to write SQL. But with Laravel, you don't have to write SQL. So let me just show an example how we model it. Okay, let me close this one. Okay, okay. Here you can see that it's structured in, for example, you can have app. You have the models. So this is the what I'm talking. So you can see that it's an object. You have like district here. Let's open a district. What we have in district. Okay, you can see that a district will have the name, the code. For example, here you have the code, and of course it has a relationship with a state. See, it belongs to a state. So a district has a state. So you can see that this code is very simple and very, I mean, relatively not that complex, as opposed to if you have to write a SQL. So if you have to translate a SQL here, you need to do, like, for example, select from select, in this case, let's say you have to write SQL, select name code district from district. And then you also have to maintain the relationship, for example, from state ID equals to another table. For example, you have a state table, so you have to maintain all this. If you use this, you don't have to think about this, and you can have it simply like this. You can make a relationship like this belongs to state, so it's much simpler and much easier. Alright. Okay, so let's move on. So this is one aspect of the MVC structure, which is model. So let's look back. Okay, let's look back at our whiteboard just now. Okay, what we have here. Okay, next one is on. Okay, I'm going to skip the view first. Let's go on to the. Okay, maybe view lah. Okay, think of the view is like the HTML or the presentation layer. The presentation layer. What it means here? This is where you do all the presentation. For example, okay, let's say I want to display the user. So I want to put it in a nice table. So I do a table. I want to make it in a nice color. So I will use some class or CSS. Okay, and then let's say I want to put some image. Maybe I want to have some logo, so I put my image using image tag in the HTML. Okay, I can have a lot of things. Okay, so the beauty of it, because you have this kind of separate things. Okay, for view, for model, you will have one person specializing on the data modeling, the object relationship and everything like that, the modeling. And then you can have your graphic designer, or maybe the UI UX expert. They can concentrate on the view. They don't even have to know what happens in the modeling. They don't even need to know that. They just need to use whatever object they already have inside the view, and they can just do their theming and everything like that. Okay, so that's view. Let's look in the code example. Okay, in PHP Laravel, they call it blade, the blade template. So let me just show you. Okay, so the way that they structured this, all the views will be under resources. So this is folder structure. Later on, I will also expand on this one. Just bear with me. I'm just describing the MVC concept first. Okay, so you can see that we have views here. Okay, and this is all what we call the blade template lah. So you can see, for example, like in the check-in, you have the QR form. Okay, see, you have all this CSS. So CSS is for programmers, for the front end programmer. So they will program using this language, what we call CSS lah. Meaning that this is the style lah. They can put, for example, you can see the header, background 00 is black, color is white. So you can have all this here. So usually designer will know about this lah. Okay. Okay, then here's where the HTML. Remember that I mentioned in my previous episode. So you have the HTML. So you can see here, terima kasih pendaftaran anda berjaya. So you put all the logic inside here, including the logo. If you have the logo, see, you have the image here, and then you have the name. Okay, here is where we link back to our object or the model. So you can see here that we are using, okay, this one is we use check-in. We get the check-in object and we want the name property, the attributes. So this is how we get how we bind back to the model. But there's one more step, which is the next one. Okay, the next one is the controller. So the controller is the glue. This one is what we call the glue that connects between these two. The model is from the database, while the view is the presentation layer, and the controller will move the information between the model through the view. So you can imagine this like a traffic controller. So you have like traffic controller. So this controller will move the information from model. It will move from model to view. So it handles all the logic here. So usually what we do is that the controller will be the what we call, if you in business term, we call this business logic. So this is where you're going to create most of your business logic in the controller. So the business logic will have like, they will control the flow. For example, okay, I only want to display a user who already checked in, for example, in Petaling, daerah Petaling. So I want to see. So in this here, I will restrict the information from the model. I will call the model and restrict the information to only users from daerah Petaling, and then I will pass it to the view. So the view will use that restriction, the object that already restricted, to display only users in Petaling. So let's take an example. I'm just showing you how it flows. So we take that example just now that we show. Okay, so here you can see that this is the check-in form blade. So what is the controller that handle this one? So let's open it. The folder is under here, HTTP controller. Okay, most likely this one check-in controller. Okay, you can see that. Okay, this is the part, the logic for this check-in controller, where when you open the check-in page, okay, it will try to get the check-in information. in here it will create lah. It will create the check-in after you submit a form, the name, phone, and everything. So it will send this check-in. This is how it send it to the view lah. So you see here, return view the check-in form, and this is where it check-in form. This one here to create is using the models. So that's how the controller glue the information from the model and pass it to the view. So you can see that it's like a middleman lah, macam traffic exchange lah. Dia jaga ini, take one and pass it to another place. So that is the controller. Of course, you can do many things. You have the different kind of concept on. Let's say your controller is becoming too big, then you can do a lot of things lah. Refactor it to make it more robust lah. So it can easily be maintained later on. That one is more advanced topic lah. So let's just focus on this one. So that's the different concept between the model, view, and controller. And a lot of web application that uses a framework will use this kind of concept, use MVC. Even the ASP.NET, if you are familiar with C# and .NET, they use the MVC concept also. Also, if you're using Ruby, they have this framework called Rails, Ruby on Rails. That one is also use the MVC. In fact, I think most of the like Laravel using last time they model it using this Ruby on Rails because you can see the code is quite similar, except that it's just a different programming language. Alright, so how are you guys so far with the MVC concept, model view controller? Do you have any question? If you have any question, please put it in your comments. I'm reading it, and I will try to respond as best as I could in this concept. Okay, any question, just post it in the Facebook comments. Alright. Okay, so just to drive a bit on the Laravel. So you can see that like I mentioned, you have all the authentication. See, you can have all the login control. So if you were to create this from scratch, okay, what is the disadvantage of using a framework? Okay, when you do using a framework, you have a certain way of thinking, meaning that you cannot, if you use your own coding style, then you have maximum flexibility. You can do whatever kind of coding you want to do. Spaghetti code pun you boleh buat, tak ada masalah. But if you use a framework, you try to think of it in a structured way, meaning that okay, kalau if I'm using Laravel Framework, I need to create my model first. After that, I need to create my controller, and then I have to create my views. So you have a structured way of doing things lah, meaning that if you are one that doesn't like organization, you want total chaos, okay, you can do your own lah. But if you're using a framework, you have to follow a certain way of doing things. So this is what if you heard in IT world, they like to use the word opinionated, meaning that when you use a framework, they have a certain way of doing things and you have to follow that. So they have a standard lah. Okay, there's the pros, of course. Your coding, everything will be structured. But the cons is that if you want to do something, you have to follow that kind of order lah. Meaning that you cannot skip you don't want to have controller, so you cannot do that lah. You cannot skip that thing. So that's a disadvantage of using framework lah. Okay, so if you can see from here, of course, okay, one more disadvantage is that okay, when you have using a framework, there is a certain overhead. So meaning that if you do the very simple programming, you only have a one-page HTML, then using a framework is overkill lah. Meaning that you can just use you can because if your application is very simple, only one pager, then okay, you can just use direct raw PHP lah, meaning that you do not need to have any framework. But once it's become more complicated, then you might think about using a framework. So because when you're using framework, this is what we call overhead lah. So it will add certain overhead. Okay, so you can see the structure here. You have for example password reset. You can also have, you can see that you have mail. You can also send a mail. So meaning that the Laravel framework already have all these blocks in place. So you do not have to reinvent the wheel. You do not have to create your own code to send mail. So no, everything is here and already built in. You can just use it. So that's the advantage of using a framework. The building blocks is there. Okay guys, I think that's all for today. Thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. Follow, share this page and turn your notification on